During the Second World War, there were many brave men and also women who refused to give in, and they resisted the Third Reich and the Nazis. Some who lived inside of occupied lands were arrested, and they paid the ultimate price, being dragged into execution chambers, and they were guillotined on the German Fallbeil, the falling axe. It was a very dangerous time, and anyone who often opposed faced a death sentence or being sent to a concentration camp. As soon as the Nazis and Adolf Hitler came to power, they opened up sites such as Dachau, where thousands of people would die during the time that these camps were in operation. These were just a few ways that the Nazis sought to inspire fear into the occupied people, keeping them in line, and also the German people, and resistors were hunted by the Gestapo, the secret police. But one young teenage woman, who was sentenced to death, and who was executed for her resistance and refusal to submit to the Nazis, was Cornelia Bosch, a female member of the Dutch resistance, who suffered a harrowing execution for her support of the Communist Party of the Netherlands, and she rose up against the Germans. But what happened with her brutal execution? To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Cornelia Bosch was born on the 2nd of August 1925 in Deventer, in the Netherlands. She was born into a huge family and was one of 10 children to her parents. The family did not have too much money. Her father was a plasterer, and her mother stayed at home and looked after the children. She had a rather normal upbringing, and she attended primary school and did well, but following her schooling, she was employed as a laboratory assistant inside of a food and chemical company in her nearby town. But during the Second World War, the Netherlands were targeted heavily by the Nazis. The Germans launched their invasion of the Netherlands in May 1940, and quickly the country fell under Nazi occupation. They employed a civil administration installed under the SS, and the Reich Commissar who oversaw the country was Arthur Seyss-Inquart, a man who would later be hanged at the Nuremberg trials. He oversaw a German administration made up of many Austrian-born Nazis, and they supervised the Dutch civil service, but because of the imposition of a Nazi government and rule, this would be devastating for many people who lived in the Netherlands. In 1940, the persecution of people inside of the country began, and the German occupation authorities banned Jewish people from working in the civil service, and they also ordered them to register their businesses. Later, further personal registrations came, and many tried to avoid this and flee, but many also found themselves rounded up and arrested. These were then sent to concentration camps such as Buchenwald or Mauthausen, but the Dutch did try to strike to get even with their occupiers. The Nazis brutally put this strike down, and they hardened the Nazi policies, and thousands of people were locked up inside of forced labour camps, and many more were sent to transit camps, where they were then sent on to concentration centres. Groups of Gestapo-encouraged hunters were also employed on the streets, with Dutch people turning on their fellow countrymen and civilians, capturing especially Jewish people, who would then be sent to their deaths inside the concentration camps. Deportations continued during the war years, and many people were sent to their deaths, but things got much worse in the country as the hunger winter of 1944 to 1945 set in. A German blockade cut off food and fuel shipments from certain towns, and this affected around 4.5 million people, who did manage to survive due to soup kitchens. It's believed that at least 22,000 people died due to this Nazi-imposed famine, which was deliberately caused, and many other nations conducted airlifts, dropping food from planes that would be used to keep many people alive. Cornelia Bosch during the Second World War lived with her mother and 3 sisters, whilst her father was conscripted to work as a forced labourer inside of Germany. He was ordered to go and work inside of the Nazi heartlands, but Cornelia, because of the terror she was seeing inside of the Netherlands, felt compelled to join the Dutch resistance and then get involved in certain resistant groups. She, along with a number of her friends, joined an organisation which carried out attacks upon the Germans and the Nazi occupying forces, and Cornelia did marry a fellow resistor in March 1945, months before the war would come to an end. Now much of her action took place in those final months of the Second World War, at a time where the Dutch people were struggling. The Dutch resistance were mostly non-violent at the time, and they preferred to organise strikes and this sort of activity rather than striking directly violently towards their enemy, as they feared reprisal against their own people. Dutch counterintelligence, sabotage and communication groups did help to provide key support to the Allies, who helped liberate the country. But Cornelia Bosch, on the 8th of April 1945, along with her husband and other members of the Communist Party of the Netherlands, gathered in an abandoned factory close to a bridge over the Idjssel River. They were to allow the Allied forces to access Deventer, and they wanted to prevent the bridge from being destroyed by German forces who were retreating. The Germans would blow up many bridges and important pieces of infrastructure to ensure that the Allies struggled to get to places to liberate and then fight. Bosch and her fellow communists brought supplies to the other fighters, and she also joined them in the defence of a bridgehead. Despite fighting for over a day, on the 10th of April 1945, the Germans destroyed the bridge and had killed 2 resistance fighters and also torched the local factory. Cornelia Bosch was, let's remember at the time, just 19 years old, and she had helped in the final stand to defend the bridge. However, the Germans, when they seized control of the bridge and the area, were in no mood to talk or hear what Cornelia and her fellow resistors had to say. They roughly dragged the young woman out to a nearby slaughterhouse, along with her husband and 3 other resistors. They were kicked and beaten as they were taken onto the grounds of the building. German soldiers gathered around each of the resistors, and Cornelia Bosch, a 19-year-old female Dutch woman, was then forced onto her knees, and an executioner pulled out his rifle and pressed it against her head. He then pulled the trigger, instantly killing Cornelia Bosch. The same treatment and execution happened for the others who had also been rounded up. Interestingly, there was a German soldier named Ernst Greve who actually refused to take part in the executions of the men and Cornelia Bosch. Because of this, one of his fellow soldiers actually pulled his own weapon on him and shot and executed the German soldier for refusing to carry out the order. The execution of Cornelia Bosch was a brutal and ruthless one, and she and her group of communist resistors had managed to briefly stall the German forces, who were very much in destroy all infrastructure mood. In the final days of the Second World War, they had been ordered to make life very difficult for their Allied enemies, and even women such as Cornelia would pick up arms to defend her freedom and lands in the face of the occupiers who had caused so much suffering over the war years. The Nazis had for a long time caused a significant amount of terror inside of the Netherlands, and the man in charge of this at the top, Arthur Seyss-Inquart, would later be executed by US hangman John C. Woods for his war crimes. But the story and life of Cornelia Bosch is one that history deserves to remember. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.